Virtual playgoers, I bid you welcome. My name is David Anthony, and I have the great honor today of talking with the composer of Romeo and Juliet, the musical, Mr. Conrad Askland. Hi, Conrad.
Hello. I really like the way you trilled the R on Romeo. That was nice.
Thank you. So let's get right into it. Why Romeo and Juliet?
So at the time, this was late 2013. Just finished a run of my musical Pan. And everyone's asking, what's the next one going to be? And all these people were coming to me with ideas. And I remember driving with my sister, and she said, how about Romeo and Juliet? And I said, no, West Side Story. It's already been done. Then the director of the show, of Pan, and his wife said, what about Romeo and Juliet? And I said, no, West Side Story, it's already been done. And as I went through ideas, Romeo and Juliet kept coming up. And I thought, okay, let's explore this. And I was getting ready to go on a tour with a show. And they said, why don't you start working on it? And I told them right at the front, I remember I said, this is not going to make any money because it's Shakespeare. And he said, I don't care. I want to do it. And I said, okay. So that was the start of it. It was actually the director of my previous show gave it to me as a challenge.
And you used Shakespeare's original text. Why did you do that rather than convert it to a modern language? So
my first idea out of the gate was to put it into, modern English. And as I was looking into it, right around the time there was a Romeo and Juliet show on Broadway, or had just been on Broadway. And so I said, let me see what they did. When I read it, it got some pretty harsh critical reviews, consistently for watering down Shakespeare's text. Their argument was, if you're going to do Romeo and Juliet and you water down Shakespeare's text, it's not Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet anymore. That's what makes it rich, is all the language. And so then I thought, well, okay, if I do it to Shakespeare's original text, let's see the one that's been done before and how I can do something different. And this is what shocked me as I looked into it. No one has ever done a successful musical rendition of Romeo and Juliet using Shakespeare's original words. Now, there's orchestral suites, there's Prokofiev, all this famous music of Romeo and Juliet. And there are people that have tried. I won't mention names. There was a attempt at a musical theater version around 2000, 2002. It didn't go well. There's a lot of theater professors that have put Shakespeare's original words to music. But frankly, I hope this doesn't sound harsh, but the only people that were really interested in seeing that is academia and other professors. Right. So none of those shows go beyond those colleges. It's classical music, 12-tone music, not what a public paying audience wants to see. And so I thought, wow, what if I did this to his original text? And then, since it had never been done before, my thought was, I'm changing enough with the music. Don't change the time period too. Like, I don't have to make it challenging by making it happen in the wild, wild West or right. Spanish Inquisition or whatever. Just to do it in its time period is challenge enough. So that set the rules. Using Shakespeare's original text, set it in the original time period.
So how did that then affect the musical style? If you were as you decided to put it in the 16th century, did you then want to marry the music, make the music 16th century as well, going into it?
The text is edited. I don't use all of Shakespeare's text, or as a musical,
otherwise
5 hours. So
we'd be there for days.
Yeah. So when I started to look to put text to music, I went through the entire script, starting to edit. And I only found 2 lines in the entire script that I could put to music. And I actually started to write a letter to the director saying, I'm trying this. It's not going to work. This is why no one's done it before. And I can't work on this project. I actually started writing the email and I thought, well, why don't I just give it another week? The next day I went through the script again and I found another 2 lines in the whole script that I could put to music. And then that process over and over eventually became musical. But that's how tedious it was.
Did you want the music to be 16th century as well?
So I didn't have, the rules that I had set were for the text. The rules were, I could only use Shakespeare's original text. I could edit it. I could redact parts, but I couldn't add words. I couldn't change words. I could repeat a word once it was said, but I couldn't say a word out of order. So musically, everything that I did had to serve the text in the chronological order that Shakespeare did it. So the one thing I found out very quickly is a lot of times the musical style will shift on a dime because I couldn't just say to the lyricist, can we have another verse here? And there's also the music, there's very little, if any of the music, very little, that comes back to a chorus and repeats.
Right.
Because it's Shakespeare structure. So musically, in general, I tried to stay away from anything that was too anachronistic. In other words, my viewpoint in writing the music was to serve the story, to make it clear to an audience. So I didn't go into it thinking, oh, it's got to be modern rock music, or, oh, it has to be 16th century. Strike drum. So there is some early music in it. There's even a little bit of Baroque music, but only in places where I thought it really served what was happening. For instance, the famous Masquerade Ball, right where they meet. The main song is probably the most contemporary sounding song in the show. It almost has like a club beat. That's one of the very few times I went from the anachronistic feel. But the surrounding music, to help offset that, is very much early music. It's background underscores.
So then what genre would you consider it, the show? Would you say it's a rock opera, classical? I mean, there's a lot of genres within musical theater. Where do you think this sits?
So I would say light classical is how I think most people would see it.
So once you got over the initial hump of, I can't write this, and you found enough lines in there right. to kind of go, oh, hang on, I can set some of this to music. From there, how long did that take you? And obviously you were, as you said, you were starting a tour and doing other stuff. So where did you find that time between working, and how long did that process take?
I had started to do enough of the show to say, yes, I can deliver a final script. This was late 2013. So a lot of times my show dates revolve around the contracts that I have. I had a contract to be music director for Rock of Ages with Norwegian Cruise Line. So it was, with the contract and rehearsal, 7 months. So I essentially had to score most of it while doing those shows. We had already scheduled, I would say it was probably February of 2014. We set the dates that it would open the end of January 2015. So I had basically 8 months to finish it all up. And you want to talk about intense. I would do a Rock of Ages show, and we might have like an hour break between shows. A half hour that I was back on the ship in my crew cabin working on orchestrations. Every night I would go to sleep listening to the playback on the notation software until something jarred me and I woke up, and I would stop the computer. And then the next morning, right when I got up, I'd fix it. So all I knew is when I got off the ship, I had to have pretty much the finished score, which I did when I got off in New York. I had the finished score, flew back to Seattle, was able to show it to the director. Not every song was fully orchestrated yet, and there were still some loose ends on songs that, had to be kind of touched up during rehearsals.
But I think that could be said for, I think, any new musical. I doubt there's anyone who's ever written a musical, walked into rehearsals the first time and not changed or finished some stuff up.
Sure. The difference is we started rehearsals not with me discovering things that needed to be changed, but things I already knew.
Right. You mentioned a little earlier challenges with having your lyricist do rewrites. And his blatant refusal, I guess you could say, to do any rewrites to help you. Was that the biggest challenge, or what was the biggest challenge for you in the process of writing this?
I would say that, the biggest, of course, the rules being being blessed with Shakespeare's text. My biggest challenge was to not change his text, but to make it interesting for the audience. Like I said, these 12-tone approaches to, doing Shakespeare, that might work for a little short bit, but not for people to sit for over 2 hours and see a show. Another thing that was very important into me writing it, I didn't want people to have to listen to a pre-lecture to understand what's going on. I wanted people, who were just fairly well read to be able to go into the show cold. Most people know there's two families that don't like each other. Their kids fall in love. It doesn't end well. Most people know that. If you just knew that, can you understand the show just walking in without having to go to Wikipedia first? And the general feedback I got afterwards was yes. In fact, I had one person tell me it was the first time they ever understood Shakespeare. So I'd say that was the biggest challenge, is to, just because it's Shakespeare doesn't mean people are going to give me any slack if, 30 seconds go by and it's boring or it doesn't land, or.
There's one scene where Paris and Romeo have a duel, which is usually, like all productions, usually gets cut. Because as you said, the original text is 4 to 5 hours long. I think it's performed in its entirety. That's usually one of the classic scenes that gets cut to move the story along, but you chose not to cut that.
So it's true. The duel between Paris and Romeo is in my show. It was not my choice directly. So I had originally, so that scene happens. I don't think this is a spoiler. Juliet has died. I hope that's not a spoiler for anyone. Romeo has heard but has not seen the body yet. He's about to break into the tomb. Paris comes, who was in love with Juliet, and challenges him to a duel outside the tomb. It's usually cut because it happens so late in the show, and it really confuses people. Feel it confuses the love story of Romeo and Juliet. So I had it cut because that was in my research. I found most people cut that, and I'm like, okay, let's go with that. Right. The director would not have it.
Wow.
He asked for, to my memory, there were very few script changes he demanded. One is that Romeo says, "I am Fortune's fool," 3 times. Right. And the other is to include the duel. I have one main rule that anyone who works with me knows: the director is always right.
Oh, that's good news to any director out there that wants to work with Conrad.
Well, it's partly self-preservation for exactly that. If I always do, what the director demands, then hopefully they'll want to work with me again. So I included it, and I have to tell you, when I watch the video of the musical, I really enjoyed that section, and I couldn't imagine it not being there. Part of the reason, when people see the video of our original production, our Paris had a very unique approach to the Paris character. And I don't want to do any spoilers. So to have this duel was just so fulfilling after seeing his characterization of Paris. And then I'm kind of surprised that everyone cut it. That's such a fun scene in a macabre sort of way.
Yeah, but I mean, as you say, sometimes like it's so close to the end, it's almost like it halts the progress to the, to where we're headed. So how did you decide what to edit, what to cut? Like what was that process like for you?
So I cut anything, even if it was a great line, and even if, there's probably a lot of Shakespeare authorities that would say, you can't cut that. I cut things that people could not understand, no matter how well they read, how well read they are. For instance, we are not going to know that's a reference to an earthquake unless we had researched and understood that there was an earthquake around those times. So I relied on assuming the audience is fairly well read, with the English language, that they would understand the words. And then if it wasn't something that I could make clear with the music, there were some things that you might not understand if it was just said, but the music would make it more clear. If I couldn't do that, if it wasn't clear and it didn't illuminate character or move the plot forward, then it was cut
out. Fair enough. You mentioned that when you started this process, you were doing Rock of Ages on a cruise ship.
Yeah.
So what was your composing time like? I would imagine, like, as any kind of writer or composer, you need a little bit of quiet space to get into like that creative business in your head. How did you manage that with what you were doing at the time?
So I think part of what you're asking, how did I get Rock of Ages music out of my head to compose?
Essentially, yeah. How did you find the creative space on a ship which is not known for giving a lot of personal space, and Rock of Ages, on top of that? How did you find the creative space in your head to compose this?
So the crew cabin, even though it's very small, I had my computer there. I had all my hard drives. So I had my notation software, my script software. That was fine. That was put on headphones and I'm in a quiet space. I don't know quite how to describe this, or that other people have this experience. When I'm working on a live show, there's an energy. Some people might get a little new agey and say, oh, it's this, biofrequency. But there's this energy when you do a show and the interaction with the audience that, unless you're feeling it very close to having just done a show, and I mean hours, it's only a memory. So a lot of times, some of my best writing times were right after the last Rock of Ages show for the evening. I would have that energy, and I would use that energy towards Romeo and Juliet. It wasn't difficult for me to block the music, because Rock of Ages is a jukebox musical, 80s hairband metal. So once the show was running, it would only take me a few minutes to get into the Romeo and Juliet world. And of course, I had the advantage because I was using notation software. I could actually listen back to some of my orchestrations, to kind of get me in the mood.
So about that, you also did orchestrate this. Not all composers do their own orchestrations.
It started with strings. I knew there'd be strings and piano, and it was kind of an outgrowth of, as I did the orchestrations, it's Romeo and Juliet. You have to have a flute. You have to have an English horn and oboe. I mean, so it was kind of like that.
And as you said, like usually the usual process is a composer will write the piano vocal part, either themselves or hand it off to an orchestrator, and they would orchestrate it. But you said you orchestrated this as you were writing it, and did the orchestration then influence the composition?
It did very much so, especially on some of the segue music between scenes. I wrote things for a combination of woodwind and strings that I would have never written if I was writing it just for piano. So in the composition process, a lot of times, let's say I'm writing on a song and I'm like, oh, there has to be a flute part here that does this. And I would put in just the note of that, like this little flute part, or oh, the string part has to be here. So a lot of songs, when they started, they had a few parts that had to be there, and then the other parts were fleshed in around it. I would say a lot of the more classical-ish leaning songs, the orchestration actually helped kind of steer how things went melodically.
I'm going to ask you an awkward question now. What is your favorite song? Can you? Is this like you like pick your favorite child type thing for a composer, where you go like, what's your favorite song in the show?
One of my absolute favorites, it's called Come Gentle Night. Oh, by the way, the names of the songs all got their titles from the first lyric that happens in them.
Right.
Because that was the easiest way to keep track of what the songs were.
Where you were.
It's a Juliet solo, and I get a little shiver thinking about it. So Tybalt has accidentally killed Mercutio. In revenge, Romeo kills Tybalt. Romeo is now banished. This is, in Act 2. So all of the plans Romeo and Juliet have made are now destroyed. Juliet doesn't know about this yet. And she comes forward in the early evening and sings so innocently about her love for Romeo. And if he should die, cut him out and put him up like little stars so that he may shine so much more beautifully than the garish sun during the day. It's so beautiful. I like the melody of it. I love that it's a moment for the audience alone with Juliet's inner dialogue, and melodically, I think it's beautiful. The director has told me that his favorite piece is when Romeo and Juliet meet at the masquerade. He's told me it's absolutely perfect musical theater. So you asked for one favorite, I gave you two people's favorite.
All right, then let's go the other way. Do you have a least favorite? Is there any song in the show where you sit back and go, yeah, maybe that wasn't my best day?
The one big one for me is, I didn't want to mess with the chronology of Shakespeare's original. He starts with the big town square fight before the prince comes out and says everyone has to depart to keep the peace. Which is great, so we're bringing the story in with this big fight. The problem is that then after that, there's all this little dialogue. Oh, have you seen Romeo today? Oh, no. I wonder where he is. I felt like that had to stay in there. But musically, there was nothing I could do to speed that up. And I would have loved to have had something else and then bring that in, because in my mind it takes about 20 minutes to get into the show, and to me the pulse of the show is when we start to see basically right before the masquerade scene, we see Romeo interacting with his group of friends, and then we see them meet. But I wish I had a magic wand to just go, okay, here's Romeo and Juliet.
You were saying you did the premiere performance of this with a community theater group.
Yeah.
And how did you find that process different to working with a professional company?
So for doing an original, I prefer the community theater schedule, because most pro shows I've worked on, at a minimum, it's 3 to 5 weeks of rehearsal, 6 days a week. And when I'm working on one of my own shows, I'm also finishing the orchestrations. I'm working as the music director. I'm rehearsing with people before and after rehearsals, and also usually doing the marketing. So most community theater groups have a 3-month rehearsal process. When I do an original show, I often do 4 months, the first month just being with leads. That gives me a lot of time to finish orchestrations. I need to set all the songs to those leads' best keys, which affects the orchestration. And then my days are split. Basically, half my day is rehearsing with people, finishing up orchestrations. The other half is on the business end, working with props, costumes, setting up marketing, graphics, all those things. I enjoy working with the community theater groups. You get such a mixture of people. Most of the people in community theater are unpaid, and they come from wildly different backgrounds. Sometimes it'll be someone's first show on stage. Sometimes it's a retired pro who just wants, to help out with shows. But they always have a lot of heart in community theater. So, it makes it very fun to bring it to the stage.
And so, given that it had its start in community theater, do you think this is an ideal show for community theater, or do you think it is more professionally oriented?
Another community theater could do it. It's not easy. It's not an easy show. I think the show would be more served by a minimum of, regional theater, or maybe a, university that has time to, really dig in on it. I don't know. I could be wrong. Maybe another community theater looks at it and goes, "Oh, this is easy."
You can bang that out.
It wasn't easy for me, and I wrote it.
Right.
It was a lot of work. Imagine as a character memorizing your melodies when they never repeat. It's very rare that a melody repeats in Romeo and Juliet because we're following Shakespeare's text.
Right. And so what was sort of the demographic of the audience that came to see this? Were they like musical theater people? Were they Shakespeare people? What was your audience makeup?
One thing I found out is, in general, this is a stereotype, but I found that people that love Shakespeare generally do not like musical theater. And they really don't like people putting Shakespeare to musical theater. On the other hand, musical theater people, in general, Shakespeare to them is a snooze fest. So dealing with that, the demographic was like it normally is, largely female, watching the musical theater shows. We did have people come from the Shakespeare communities as a curiosity. Most of them basically wanted to come to see the show crash, because just the thought of doing Shakespeare to music is just wrong, in their minds. So I would say a lot of the people that came were people that loved classic musical theater, maybe people that would see Brigadoon or something like that.
And so being in the community theater, you had the opportunity for a larger cast. I mean, normally in a Broadway show, you'd have maybe around 20, 21 in a large cast. You had more than 30, I think, in the cast of this, plus orchestra, obviously backstage. Was a bigger cast more difficult to handle?
So you're right. The pro shows are trying to get as few people as possible because of overhead. Community theater that serves the community with theatrical opportunities loves larger casts. So it was really fun because I think we had 33 people in the cast. I could be wrong on that. But we did a lot of stage, Saturday all-day stage combat rehearsals.
Oh, fun.
So you had 30 people, with swords practicing stage combat. I mean, it was really cool.
I hope you had a large room for that.
We did. We used a gymnasium at an elementary school, the full gymnasium. So we also had a lot younger cast members than you might normally have. I think down to age 13, 14, around there. I love working with the large cast in community theater because there's just, oh my God, there's just so much energy.
And so you did this in, I believe, 2015?
Yeah, the show opened the end of January 2015, and the video was from Valentine's Day, February 14th, 2015.
So what have you been doing since then?
Oh, wow. Has there been since then? I did COVID. I don't know if you've heard about that. Let's see.
Yeah, you don't have to account for the last year, but there's a couple of years before that. But
So after that, I did another run with Rock of Ages, being their music director and keyboardist. I finished a bachelor's degree with Berklee College of Music, and then finished a master's degree with in arts leadership with Colorado State University. I wrote a fourth musical called Pray the Gay Away, which went on stage in November 2019. That show is about the painful world of gay conversion therapy. And I won't talk more about that or I'll start to cry. And then, I was music director and keyboardist for the world tour of Verikai by Cirque du Soleil, the Verikai show.
So essentially not much. You haven't really done that much since.
No, not much. Eating a lot of pizza.
So as I said, you did do this in 2015, and now you're releasing it online for free. Why now? Why 6 years later?
COVID. I'm not alone in this. So it's been, as we're talking now, it's been a little over a year since the shutdown. Mm-hmm. I'm fine with it for a while. Gosh darn it. I mean, the connection, I don't have the connection with people. I miss that so much, even just, beyond the theatrical aspect. So I decided in January to start releasing a lot of my library, my music library online for free, just to get it out there. Our life is so short. We've seen that with COVID. There's so much to share. And as I started releasing my library, I think I was about a month into it, and I thought, why don't I release one of my musicals? I'm hoping that this reaches a larger audience so that they can see the great hard work that this community theater group put into the show. And maybe on the side, also raise a little money to help these groups so that they're stronger artistically when we finally someday come out of COVID. The Lincoln Theater, for the bulk of the last year, has been entirely shut down because of COVID.
Wow, that's lovely. And the fact that you're doing it as a fundraiser for them and not just yourself, I think is a very admirable. And looking for, like you say, I think we've all in the theatrical community around the world feel a little bit starved of the experience of doing theater. So, at least
that's
to be
the
able
word
to
is
see
starved.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I also wanted to make really clear that this is a free public event, but donations are encouraged. And 100% of all donation monies will go to benefit the historic Lincoln Theater in Mount Vernon, Washington.
Let's imagine for a moment a post-COVID world.
You're asking a lot.
I know it's quite a stretch at the moment, but what are your hopes for Romeo and Juliet, the musical, when we can all once again gather and practice our craft and perform?
I'm hoping that people from Shakespeare groups, like, Ashland, the Ashland Shakespeare Festival, someone from there goes, this is something we should look at, or a university or a regional theater. It's a very unique thing to have all this, custom bespoke music feeding Shakespeare's original text. I feel like it does it very well. The video is community theater, and performers are at different talent levels. And so another production would have a different, feel to it. Just look at it and consider it.
Okay.
Ashland Shakespearean Festival.
So finally, then, where can we look at it? Where do we get to see it online?
The premiere will be April 17th, 2021 at 7 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. It'll be on my YouTube channel. So go to YouTube, type in my name, Conrad Askland. Most likely, if you're watching this video, you're probably already on my YouTube channel, or because this video will be on my YouTube channel, or this interview is embedded on, another website. So just double click on the video. That will probably bring you to my YouTube channel.
And is it only available that evening, or will it be available after that for viewing?
If there's interest in another incarnation of the show, a lot of times you pull back old versions. Mm-hmm. So if you don't see the video, that might be a good sign that there's another production of it gearing up. So I don't know. If you want to see it, watch it that night. It's free.
Conrad Askland, it has been an absolute pleasure chatting to you, and I couldn't wrap this up without saying that you have probably the finest beard in show business, my friend.
This is a COVID beard.
COVID special. I have serious beard envy right now. But I really enjoyed learning a little bit more about the show, and I'm looking forward to seeing it. It'll be in my calendar. April 17th, I'll be on your YouTube channel. All right, ladies and gentlemen, you've heard it. April 17th, 7 p.m., Conrad Askland's YouTube channel, Romeo and Juliet, the musical.
Huzzah!
Huzzah!